And our two special guests tonight, Tom Carey, Don Schmidt, as they are witness to Roswell, unmasking the government's biggest cover-up. We'll be back with both of them in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. So there was a nurse at a local hospital in Roswell, New Mexico, who apparently told the mortician, Glenn Dennis, about the bodies that she had seen. She was distraught. They were never able to verify the story on the Glenn Dennis end. And Tom and Don, let's let you pick it up because you say you think you have found the nurse, or you did find the nurse.
George, if you'll allow me, before Don picks up on the nurse story.
Okay.
Regarding the flight of the straight flush, as we call it, I just counted them up. There were 11 crew members on that flight. We attempted to locate everyone. We did locate all but just a few. And those we were not able to interview are presumed to be dead now. So we did try to locate everybody. And when Arthur mentioned that when they were all after the flight, they were gotten together and told that if you talk about it, I think Art said you'll find yourself in Fort Worth. Mm-hmm. He meant Fort Leavenworth.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but anyway, there was also, we also tried to, and we did locate the flight ops officer, the flight operations officer on that flight. Mm-hmm. His name was Edgar Skelly. And Don can tell this story that we actually did interview him on I think the most difficult type of interview to do is a cold interview where you go up and knock on the person's door and introduce yourself. And on our team, Don is that specialist, that he is the one that goes to the front door and does those interviews. And maybe Don can share with you and your audience what resulted with his interview with Edgar Skelly.
Okay, let's do that.
And I don't like to leave without getting some information. Once I'm there, in fact, we pinned him down in his home in Riverside, California, and he actually answered the door wearing a bathrobe, so he had to excuse himself to go dress. And as his wife led me into the front room, she knew who I was, and she kept saying, "You have to get him to talk. He needs to finally talk. Every time I see something on TV, I say, 'Honey, I know you were there. Why can't you tell me?' And he'll leave the room." So she saw this as one last effort. And he was a masterful dodger in that he always tried to change the subject on me. Mm-hmm. And he clearly, he's in the base yearbook. He was identified by all of these crewmen on that specific flight. Major Edgar Skelly, he was the one. And it always came back to, I can't remember. And no matter what name I would throw out, I can't remember. But then he always came back to me. Now, why do you need to know about this? Why is this so important to you?
And if he couldn't remember, why would he even ask that, right?
Precisely. And then he suggested, well, I was in a minor car accident a few weeks ago. I hit my head, and I'm having a hard time remembering. But yet when I was finally leaving, and I asked him for a shortcut back to L.A., he knew exactly how to lay it out for me. So I said, well, thank God that car accident didn't cause any permanent damage. But what was interesting is that when I left, I asked his wife if I could have people such as Arthur and others on the crew actually call her, give her some ammunition, and possibly lead up to a confrontation, directly with her husband.
Sure.
And she thought it was a wonderful idea. And I talked to, Robert Slusher, Lloyd Thompson, also on that flight. They agreed. I call her back some weeks later, and she says to me, "Don't ever call this number again. I am not to ever talk to you again."
Wow, she just turned on you.
Yes, exactly. So one can well imagine how she would have been read the riot act after we had left. So again, and this was just in the last 10 years. So again, what is,
what's going on?
What's going on after all this time that these people still live in such fear.
That's true. Now, and tell me now about the nurse, and then we'll move on. But,
yes, okay.
You've just got my curiosity in this story.
Well, and it was through a second-hand witness, someone who had actually worked at the Walker Airfield at the base hospital back around 1960. And she worked with a nurse, a fellow nurse who suggested, or mentioned that, I was back here in 47 when the bodies came in from that flying saucer crash. And there wasn't much more said about it, but then Tom was the one who was the most instrumental in actually tracking down this very witness, this very woman. And we had a female investigator, Wendy Connors, actually go to the house when we located her. And she was especially interested in the affidavit that was shown her of Glenn Dennis. In fact, she wouldn't take her eyes off of it. She kept reading it. In fact, she even asked, was Glenn the one who told you about me?
Huh.
And this woman's name was Mary Lowe. We identify her in the book. We have her picture. And she just, wasn't me, wasn't there. Didn't matter what anybody else said. Didn't matter that there were witnesses to my making such comments of being involved.
Right.
And then the very afternoon, we confronted Glenn Dennis. And without so much as mentioning her name, he responded, "Oh, you mean Mary Lowe. She knows everything about this." So it caused us to step back and say, well, maybe Glenn wasn't misleading us. Maybe he, for whatever reason, gave us the wrong name, and I think Tom would agree, he was much closer to the nurse that he's ever been willing to let on to. His first wife is still alive, and he was married with a second wife at that time. But anyway, the next day, when we once again would confront Glenn, he retracted, he recanted. I never mentioned her. She wasn't involved. Don't ever bring it up again.
It's like somebody got to him, too.
Or she called him and said, how dare you, how could you possibly have betrayed that, our confidence in this story? And end of story. We tried repeatedly after that. We know there were nurses involved. We've had other nurses who we've suspected. And amazingly enough, even the nurses in M Squad, in the medical squad, in the yearbook, they all died rather young. Not that there was anything nefarious, involved there, but it must have been a hard life. They must.
Unlike the Kennedy assassination, where all the witnesses seemed to disappear. Huh?
Right, correct. Yeah. But we had tracked down another nurse, Rosemary McManus, in a nursing home before she passed away, and all she would say was that based on all the unknown doctors and nurses who literally stormed the base hospital, all of a sudden they just all showed up out of nowhere. She said clearly something big had happened.
Do you two see a smoking gun at all on this Roswell case?
Well, there are. We talk about a smoking gun and the Holy Grail. To us, the smoking gun is the Ramey memo. This is the picture taken on July the 8th, 1947, of General Ramey kneeling with the weather balloon.
With all the debris out there, right?
Yes.
Okay, I remember that. And he's holding something.
Yes.
Okay.
He's. There were, if I remember, there were 6 or 7 pictures taken at that press conference, and Ramey is in 4 of them. 2 by himself and 2 with his adjutant, Thomas Dubose, Colonel Dubose. And you can tell by he's holding what appears to be a telex in his hand.